as I said, always, you know what, the data privacy, one of the most important topics. So before we start the discussion, first thing, thanks a lot for joining. I think the timing is a little 2 days late, but yeah. So 28th usually is decided as a data privacy day. Uh, yes, I think better late than sorry. So let's begin. Um, of important parts, which I was wondering on the data privacy, or rather say, data protection. People have been using this word quite often, you know, and most important, which I felt, was it's not the data privacy or the implementation of this. How about the governance piece? What do you say? Shall we talk a bit more on that and then move to the next other topics? Or, we have a day,
No,
we have a happy birthday of data privacy. So, what do you say? Should we start with the governance piece?
So I think first of all, Suresh, thank you so much for having me. For this. Better late than never. So on 28th, we as DSCI did happen to celebrate the Data Privacy Day along with the rest of the world. And of course, a lot of organizations are observing the Data Privacy Day today as well, on account of the fact that it was a weekend. Right.
Yep.
Having said that, I think if we are talking about fintechs and of course data governance being at the heart of this topic, we can certainly come to that. But if I may quickly talk about the overall fintech ecosystem and where it is headed, right? Because that would set the context well and would also help us and the people who are listening to us in evaluating the kind of data that we are talking about, and where this data is coming from at the end of the day, right? So if it's okay with you, I would just quickly want to set a context around fintech and where it is headed.
Yeah.
All right. So I think, Suresh, one is of course the devices and the channels being proliferating, and what I've observed is that from high value and low volume transactions, we are rapidly what should I say, migrating high volume and low value transactions. Right. And also, if we were to talk about the fintechs or the capability providers who have disrupted this entire, transaction processing life cycle or transaction processing ecosystem, they have very well extended the ecosystem. Right. And of course, the evolution of the underlying technology, which is being leveraged to, if you're talking about fintech or if you're talking about the overall financial services platforms and ecosystems, then authentication and authorization come to me as very, very important, mechanisms or part of the processes. So they
Yep.
are, authenticating and authorizing today's transactions. So this presents a really interesting story for consumption. And of course, there is the direct connection with the data governance and the data privacy piece, right? So, and
Okay.
also the policy and regulatory interventions that are being done, and of course the massive identity program that has been responsible for onboarding of millions of end users. So these are all vital pieces of the ecosystem which we need to understand if we are deliberating data governance for fintech. And
I think well put. Yep.
yeah, and just one very small point, last but not the least. So I think that push for open data and push
Yep.
for the open architecture and open APIs and banking,
Yep.
that continues at all levels, and that is why precisely we are here.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think you're summing it up very well on that, because the, something very very interesting which is happening in this entire pieces. You touched upon authentication, you touched upon authorization pieces, the pim pam solutions we have. But I
Hmm.
think, uh, again, we are talking about something which is, if we go a level up, are you also saying that governance is something which is playing a very integral? But I think there is one more piece which is like awareness to people,
Hmm.
thanks to the the social media.
Yeah.
I always feel that the social media have been the biggest contributor, or something which is the biggest thing which has happened to mankind, because uh, a person that never has a time to read the full book on
Hmm.
data privacy.
Of
But
course.
now, because of a keyword, people are now able to understand.
Hmm.
So would do you like to give some keywords? What is the most important keywords for data governance standpoint?
Yeah, so I think data governance essentially, when we're talking about organizations' data management process, organizations' data architecture and models. And just think of it extending right down to the individual technologies, individual data sets, and data repositories. Right.
Yep.
And if I were to very broadly talk about, of course, we can delve into each of the domains as the discussion
Right.
pans out. But if you talk about the key data governance domain areas, right? So, of course, data privacy and security stand right at the top, which is, and also about creating appropriate data sharing agreements, right?
Agree.
Because if you go back to my original context setting of how the fintech ecosystem is getting extended, so creating those appropriate data sharing agreements is very, very important. And
Yep.
probably the firewalls between the departments, to ensure that the data access and sharing is happening in accordance with the privacy principles, in accordance with the laid down set of rules, which in turn help organizations to achieve that particular compliance or with the law of the land. Because now it is, of course, truly multi-geography, geographical nature of the work that we are dealing with,
Yep.
right? If I were to talk about the focus areas of data governance, which you were talking about, right, in addition
Yep.
to
Yep.
the broad blocks which you mentioned. So, of course, discovery and inventorizing the key personally identifiable information. Because when you talk about data privacy, identifiability is the key attribute which is
I
guiding
agree.
all your processes all along.
Correct.
Right. So whether it is building that inventory or visibility of the personally identifiable information of the customers, or building of that data lineage, across all the data sources from which the data is coming to you, and of course defining the new set of access policies and security controls. So I think
Correct.
to begin with, and for preliminary thoughts, these would be my thoughts around data governance, blocks, so to speak.
Actually, so basically, again, we would like to, this discussion. I think it's a good forum. We should be touching upon environmental aspects, uh, like you said, geopolitical boundaries of the company,
Yeah.
or the law of land where the company is operating, the
Yeah.
social aspects. So, for example, we have the aspect like Twitter, Facebook. You see, or LinkedIn, as a matter of fact, or then the governance aspect. So instead of we say ECG for our cardiograph, we should say what, ESG for our environmental, social, and governance aspect for the data. I think that's exactly where our fintech space is also kind of churning up and moving in that direction, because see, at times what happens is regulators can change the law, but then we also have to understand how we have a scalable and more resilient design, and the vendor ecosystem, so that we can also adhere to the entire environment as well. So what do you say? uh, any thoughts on that lines?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you talk about the data strategies, data governance
Yep.
is of course one very, very critical part. But
Yep.
since data is the center of the discussion, for this particular theme, so we recently were, in conversation with one of the leading banks, financial services organization in the
Yep.
public sector, and we are still working with them in revising their data strategies. So
Yep.
they are, of course, talking about democratization of data, a thought probably, which couldn't come to us very easily. They were talking about data security and privacy as one very, very important component, and
Correct.
also establishing that single source of truth. Because
True.
one of the important problems, or the challenges which that particular organization is grappling with, or rather a lot of organizations, I'm sure that I
Correct.
can speak for the rest of them as well, is the siloed treatment or the siloed approach, or the availability of data in silos within the organization, and not having that pan organization visibility, as I was talking about as part of the data governance framework, of the personally identifiable information which comes to the organizations,
I
right?
agree with you. Yep.
Yeah. So
But
this
I
is
think
yeah,
I
please.
I think in fintech, there is one piece which has come out much more complicated and larger, which is uh, data in principle. You know, uh, from data standpoint, what happens is data in principle. We have PayU might have my data because extensively using Amazon. PayU might be having your data as well. So data in principle, I am the owner of the information, right? But who is data fiduciary? So if you see, what is happening is, as part of fintech standpoint, we are somewhere in a space where we have to uh, create a very very thin line of all the principles and the how the data is going to be processed by the company and how they're consuming it. This whole piece is something which is becoming more and more important and necessary for us. So, for example, uh, uh, usually I say, a fruit vendors and all the guys who are selling their material on a mobile shop or a thela wala, they also have uh, a barcode with them. So if you don't have exact change, but they say, you know, take it, no worries. You can pay Google Pay, you can say PayU or something like that. Uh, See, imagine, if they lose the data, what will happen? Something which is an important piece for us Indians. We always have a feeling that what, it's okay if I lose the data. What harm it will happen to me? But the but but my point is, usually when people have such kind of critical information with them, they can actually sell it on a higher speed. They can understand my buying patterns and then start giving me the ads accordingly. What do you say? I mean, that's a piece which I always feel that we need to be handling is very sensitively.
No, absolutely. Because even if you look at, I will answer this point, but I'll also refer to one of the points that you mentioned with respect to social media, right? So if you are following the space of how European Union has been
Yeah.
progressing or traversing the space of enforcement. So GDPR, it's been 3-4 years more than that, right? And how Meta was brought into question, or Meta's practices when it comes to behavioral advertising. I think that's a one very very interesting example, and how Irish data protection authorities have been making these organizations accountable. So handling of the data, or the grounds which you
Yeah.
leverage in order to
Mhm.
process the personal data. Right. So those grounds are now being looked at or scrutinized very, very closely. And you
Yes.
can't any longer afford to say that, okay, this is what my intent was, but at the end of the day, I wasn't able to demonstrate that, I've implemented enough measures. So demonstrability part becomes very, very important, and just restricting that, that privacy principle implementation to in just the spirit, in the principle part, and not following through with the spirit part, so to speak. Right. So that is one example which comes to my mind.
You know what?
Yeah.
It could have been a situation. See, what is happening is, if you are operating in India, some of the laws I really like. If you're operating in India, the data has to be in India. Law of land. It's exactly the same thing what is happening in Europe. If you're operating in European countries, the data cannot cross the boundaries. This is something which is going to protect people, give them an assurance that what the judiciary is, sorry, the regulators are, you know ensuring that the personal data is not crossing the boundaries. The companies also gets more and more responsible about how they can actually pick it up. But from DSCA standpoint, you might have seen a lot of cases. What do you say? Some just tell us something more about if you have seen any kind of instances where we see these laws are actually much more extensively utilized and useful for us as well.
So I think, Suresh, from a DCA standpoint, of course, strictly speaking, so when we are looking at how the data flows are emerging, or if we talk about the future of data flows, so from a business development standpoint, from an innovation standpoint, that flows of data across the boundaries is undoubtedly very, very important.
Yeah.
Right. But if you look at what EU is propounding, because EU is typically looked at as a model reference, when either when we are talking about our draft digital personal data protection bill, or for that matter, other geographies coming up with their own laws. Right. So they are definitely propounding that data share. They're not saying that data sharing is bad or something. They're just saying that they're just trying to bring in that responsibility and accountability factor to a great extent in this data sharing flows and data sharing arrangements. Right. So that's how I think I would like to put it. That, yeah. Sorry.
But I think actually, what? Sorry, I'm cutting you, but actually, you know what? You got a right point. This is how the data ownerships are evolving, isn't it? Who is accountable for my data? Aditya, you there? Okay, I think we lost Aditya.
Yes,
And
sorry, I'm back. Probably I mentioned my. Sorry, you were saying, Suresh, something.
yeah, I think you brought a great point. Aditya, this is how the data owners or
Hmm,
data custodian concept have been evolved, isn't it? Because uh, first we know that who owns the data, and then we say, you know what, you are the custodian of my data. You decide, who can access my information. Something like when we sign up to Facebook, the first thing what it says is, tell us how we can use your information.
hmm,
Something of it, maybe it has been long time and we have been saying agree, but if you read the fine print, it says, tell us how we can use your information, so that they can actually give us much more sound services or ads from their side. So I think you touched upon the right piece. What do you say? Okay, I think we lost Aditya again. So, um, in the meantime, Aditya joins. Let us also understand couple of important pieces from fintech standpoint. So, what happens in fintech is we have a social responsibility which talks about thank God you're back.
Yeah,
I
please
thought
continue.
I'm all alone now. So no, I was just talking about from fintech standpoint. We thought, what, security by design could be sufficient.
Hmm,
But by the time we completed security by design, we realized, oh, this cannot be completed. It is an ongoing process, and now the first piece has to be, the privacy by design. Before even we say, what, we are ready, a lot of governance pieces came in place. And if you see, the entire industry is moving in the same direction. Um, Example, let's say, let's say if we have a hypothetical scenario where we have a vendor.
hmm,
We want to have a service from this vendor. The biggest challenge is nowadays we have a cloud companies, Aditya. So what happens with the cloud companies is they believe in picking up the data storing location based on the pricing they get.
hmm.
Correct.
Yeah,
For us as a fintech and a regulatory business, we can't afford that. So when
yeah.
people do ask this question quite often, you know what, Suresh, this is expensive. Have you lost your mind? You can go for a cheaper vendor. Uh, Indeed, yes, I have lost my mind because you know uh, that's the situation we are into. If you see what is happening is, uh, law of land says the data should not be crossing the boundaries.
Hmm,
And then again, this also does translate into a following lines, which is the moment you have services you are taking from a vendor, your data should not be crossing it. So when the vendor, uh, we have to oblige with the regulators, and that goes on and on for everything unless the entire piece is rock solid. So fintech becomes a very different business. When it started, it was not this mature or this regulated, but now if you see, the regulations have become way more detailed, way more precise, and you know what, it has the mandate of adhering to the lines is also becoming very, very serious. So I think things are evolving, isn't it?
No, absolutely,
uh,
certainly. So I think, as I mentioned, Suresh, that at the end of the day, regulators are also evolving, right? So it's not that they have a complete handle
so
of
true.
all the things, but
Yeah.
by virtue of our interaction with the industry, our interaction with the regulators, they are very well, wary of the fact, of course, the
Yep.
translation of that understanding of the nuances of the privacy domain. This will, and of course, if you're talking about from a cloud services standpoint, right? So the issues like security, privacy, data residency, localization, and of course the contractual guidelines. So that understanding around all these five buckets, I think, in my opinion, has been evolving, where there is a conscious, understanding at the back of mind that if we are coming up with regulations which are overly restricting or onerous in nature, right? That might at the end of the day hamper the prospects of the business. But at the same time, regulators have a very clear ask and expectations that sufficient measures. I'm not talking about not going into the measures per se, but sufficient measures and safeguards, whether it is in terms of localization, whether it is in terms of having that data not crossing the boundaries. If it is that after categorization of the data, after classification of the data, if it is extremely sensitive personal information, again, of course, it is contextual. Everything is contextual when it comes to
Yep.
privacy.
Yep.
Probably regulator has that very clear expectations from the organizations that okay,
Yep.
these are the certain set of measures to which we want you to be seen acting, and you should be able to demonstrate to us. Again, coming back to my point of demonstrability. Right, but
Yep.
at the end of the day, let's face the fact that every piece in the ecosystem, including the regulators, are trying to step up their understanding when it comes to, when they are trying to come out with, let's say, master directions or guidelines, whatever you want to call
Any inputs which you, if from your experience standpoint, where maybe any guidelines which government has, or like regulators might have recommended that you can use a personal data, but do you remember or anything from that standpoint?
No, sorry, come again. Let's say you're talking about any recent directions that have come out for.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay, so of course, let's say if you're talking about the fintechs per se, right? So we do remember the RBI's master directions and how they've evolved ever since 2018, or if we go back to 2016 when this whole cybersecurity framework came out from RBI side, and then we have seen series of advisories, legislations, not legislations, advisories and directions coming in from there. So
Yep.
there, RBI has a very clear expectation that the payment providers, the aggregators, and all the stakeholders in the payments ecosystem, they have propounded a security, fraud management, and fraud prevention and a risk management framework, which clearly lists out various aspects. When it comes to having securing your mobile applications, when it comes to securing or having that governance structure put in place, probably having that
Fantastic.
from the leadership. So I think
Yep.
master directions from RBI for fintech is one thing that comes to my mind. But
Yep.
you did mention about secure by design, Suresh. Now,
Yep.
privacy by design has become so much important that ISO is just on the verge, or I think it has already happened, of
Yep.
adopting privacy by design standard. Because
Oh, yes.
organizations, at the end of the day, it's very good to hear that privacy by design should be incorporated. Even the draft digital data protection talks about privacy by design, privacy impact assessment. But at the end of the day, how do you actually go on to implement privacy by design? So
Yep.
those guidances are evolving. ISO standard is one example that came up, although it's not, it is voluntary and completely for referential purpose. But I think
Right.
gradually these guidelines are more and more guidelines are coming into the ecosystem.
This makes sense actually. You know what? Uh, I mean, it's very interesting to hear, that DSCI is also any areas where DSCI is also trying to pitch in for privacy by design, specifically from fintech standpoint.
So I think when it comes to operationalization of privacy by design, we do have, of course, as part of the DSA credentials or the DSA privacy framework, if I were to refer to it, right, wherein we are specifically talking about personal information security, because we are saying that data security being at the heart of fintech. So
Yep.
although that DSA privacy framework does not take a sectoral approach, but yes,
Yep.
recently what we have started doing is we have targeted three sectors. BFSI, and within BFSI we are looking at banking and insurance, and of course healthcare. So these three sectors we are trying to bring out the sectoral nuances for privacy, when it comes to the BFSI sector. And I'm pretty sure the guidance that we are developing, that would be out very shortly, in another 1 month or so. These guidances would definitely help organizations who are actually not waiting for the law to come in, but who have started the journey of privacy implementation. So from an implementation standpoint, and from a privacy by design standpoint, or when to conduct that risk assessment from a privacy standpoint, what we call as
Yep.
a EIA, right? So I think these guidances from DSCI organizations might find useful.
Hey, Aditya, in the interest of time,
Yeah,
we have audiences who are also students. What
yeah.
what is the messages you would like to give to them? What
So
should
you're
they
saying,
do to start their journey?
right. So I think first and foremost, having that, if they are just getting started with the privacy journey. So, and I'm assuming that because, when, if you look at security, that's a
Mhm.
pretty mature domain when it comes to having the requisite teams in place. Although talent crunch is completely different problem which everyone grapples with. But when it comes to privacy, understanding that nuances of the subject matters of privacy, that's very, very important. And that would be the first and the foremost step, that
Yep.
you have that understanding. Let's say if I'm talking about the principle of consent, right?
Yep.
So do you have an understanding of two things? One is the privacy expectations. So the expectations part ties back to the law of the land. And
Yep.
second is from an organizational standpoint, do you have that understanding or comprehension of the implementation nuances? Say, for example, I'll take one example. If you're talking about criteria for consent, right? So, selection of the consent type, the operations, the data, the regulation, and most importantly, the context. So, deconstructing all these elements would be the step one. Although, again, I'm saying too many things as part of step one, but you have to have that. Reiterating my original point, understanding of the subject matters of privacy and
Correct.
the context for your organization to begin your journey. Right. And if you allow me another, 30
Sure.
seconds. So let's say the kind of data, because if it is all about data, so then, the data which you already have, historical data, the data that you might be collecting is becomes another category. Third is the
Correct.
data that you're required to collect, by obligation of the law. Then is
Okay.
the data you generate. And when I'm talking about these categories become very much important, especially in the fintech industry.
Correct.
And second last is the data that you receive and that you share with the external
Yep.
parties, right?
Yep.
And finally is the data around which helps you to enrich the transactions, right? So
Absolutely.
understanding and breaking down these types of data, this
Yep.
has to be the step one for any privacy implementation journey, in my opinion.
Yes, that means, uh, if I sum it up to some smaller, or
Yeah,
shorter words, people really need to or students really need to start their journey with understanding the meaning of data, and learning the legalities and how the laws are protecting it,
yeah,
and last, but how the automation is out of the regulations and periphery, which we are able to leverage right now. Because
undoubtedly.
data privacy is something which is, uh, the only answer to
Hmm,
data privacy is automation.
hmm.
If there is a human intervention, then there is a problem, and then that's when the law comes. But if you automate things, and you know what, you keep the data inside the boundary of the country, I think, mm, no doubt things are gonna be much better. Okay,
Yeah,
this is actually going a very interesting point, Aditya. Uh, you guys already have presence in every industry space, right? You guys are already part of the NESCOM. Basically, you guys are babies of NESCOM. So the good piece is that you get the exposures. Any incident we would like to mention where uh, where people have one of the best practices, and something which people can actually take back from this discussion.
So I think when it comes to governance, let's say if I were to talk about that, right? So we have seen multiple examples, of course. Given the sensitivities around it, it may not be it may be advised to go into the nitty gritties and the names of the organizations. But by and large, what has been our experience by virtue of what you were saying, interacting with organizations, and I limit myself to critical infrastructure organizations, CI
Yep.
organizations of
Yep.
BFSI being very much a part of the CI, right? So, from a data security standpoint, the best practices, of course, goes without saying that adherence to the established frameworks does help you significantly. I'm not saying it helps you cover all the bases, but if you're talking about ISO, if you're talking about various variants of PCI DSS, if you're talking about, let's say, if you're operating in Europe, then PDS2, and all these established frameworks definitely help you a lot. That is step one, right? Best practices, so to speak. Another is, of course, now what we have seen, especially in the fintech space, if you look
Yep.
at whether it's the directions from coming from the regulators or
Yep.
what practitioners have been observing. So now
Yep.
they are putting significant focus on securing their app, maybe
Yep.
whether it's mobile app, whether it is the web application platforms.
Yep.
So the effort that seems to be going into building capacities around DevSecOps, whether it is throughout the development lifecycle of the software or the platform, the security practices which are being embedded, right?
Yep.
And I'll just take one very interesting example when it comes to DevSecOps. So I think this was year before last. So the US administration, came out with a presidential executive order where they were specifically talking about, software supply chain security. So
Oh, nice.
they
Okay.
actually went down to the level of talking about software composition analysis, right? They were actually talking about software bill of materials, right? So that we do have an understanding that whenever that software development, which is extremely modularized, which is
Yep.
extremely, if we are talking about the development paradigms like no code, no code, where virtually anybody can code with bare minimum intervention, right?
Yep.
And the third party components which are being sourced in order to put together a piece of software, right? And of course, I think nobody needs to be told the incredible rate at which builds are being deployed, right? So that goes without saying. So I think they went to talk about that all these concepts, becoming very, very critical for the fintech space specifically. And I'm not saying it's just limited to fintech, but I just thought of bringing this very interesting example because this
This is
executive order coming from the US president talking about software supply chain security and just
yes.
speak to the DevSecOps piece within the fintech space. Just
But
thought of
worth mentioning, Aditya. This is fantastic discussion, but I think in the interest of time, I think we should open it for people for questions. Let's say what they have to ask for us.
yeah, certainly.
Okay, I think somebody is typing, but it's not coming up.
That's okay. We can continue the conversation as you deem fit.
No, I think we should either wait. Somebody's trying to reach out, but I think
Yeah.
we have a proxy issues stopping it. No worries, Aditya. Uh, it's Let me ask one question from from behalf of audience. So one of the questions which have been put on the offline chat, basically it talks about, you mentioned about the journey for students. We also discussed about the governance pieces of it, but I think, uh, which is the most important piece from my standpoint is the connecting link between governance models and the is understanding the business. So usually people feel that data topic itself is a very generic topic, but you will not be able to do a justice about it until unless you know the business.
Hmm.
So if you are in a healthcare domain, you don't understand the nuances of clinical trials and how you have to handle the subject data, you might lose the entire license of the trial.
Hmm.
That is exactly what happens with the fintech business as well. So that's just my point. What do you say?
No, absolutely. So, Suresh, when I was talking about the six types of data, the historical data, enrichment data, and so on and so forth. Let's say if you're talking about fintech space, let's say the data that you are bound to collect, let's say the KYC data. So I think unless you have, when I was talking about visibility over personal information
Yep.
being the first step of your privacy implementation framework, not the
Yep.
understanding part of it, which is separate, which is the subject matter. But if
Correct.
you have that visibility over the personal information, and then you're able to effectively map out the how the data flows within the organization, how
Yep.
various roles, functions, and departments come into picture when it comes to processing of, not even processing, the entire life cycle, the procuring of personal data till the time you get rid of the data. So I think that
Absolutely.
that business context, I would agree, is undoubtedly the most important piece when it comes to implementing or even starting to think implementing data privacy.
That should be the last point, Aditya. Anything from your side? I think we should be closing this discussion, and I'm very thankful that you have been able to take out some time for us, especially for this event. Uh, On behalf of PayU, I really want to thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge and discussing your experience of DSCI with us. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Suresh, for having me. Hope
Thank
we
you.
were able to give at least a few insights to the audience.
Yep. Take care. Bye bye.